We will go ahead and get started, and maybe others will join. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and get started. Haley, can you add me screen sharing access, please?
Yes, sorry about that. Let me. All right, you should be good to go. Let me know if that didn't work.
Okay. Alrighty, so hopefully you can all see that.
Yep, all good.
Okay, cool. So definitely feel free. I want this to be an open conversation. So if you all have questions as I go through the content, feel free to chat them, and then Haley can kind of let me know what your questions are. So we'll go ahead and get started. So this is just really information regarding some specific interviewing strategies. Very baseline first level interview is where I'm starting with today. So this would be by way of most likely a phone or a virtual interview. And then, you know, interviewing is so much more than just the actual act of the interviewing process. There's a lot of pieces that go into before the actual interview takes place. So I'm going to cover some of that as well. So just here's kind of my agenda, I guess, if you will, of what I'm hoping that you'll take away from today. Basically kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end, I guess, if you were to think about it in that way for an interview, but the preparation, what things you need to make sure that you're doing the actual day of, and then the follow-up component as well, which kind of just closes the loop, which I think sometimes a lot of students miss the opportunity on is the follow-up piece. And that can really be one of those attention to detail things that are overlooked, and it is incredibly important. And then just different skills, tools, guidelines I want to share with you all, different platforms to do some research. And then how are you going to effectively market yourself in an interview context? So those are things that I want to chat about today. So within the career world, there is a professional organization that we all follow, and that is the National Association of Colleges and Employers. So that's where we find out a lot of data and what employers are looking for, new hire data, lots of different trends and industry standards. They put out a lot of content, a lot of webinars, just like any other professional association would. So I just thought this might be helpful for you all to think about it. This is 2019 data. These are the top skills or attributes that employers are looking for upon new hires. So I thought it would be helpful for you all to see, and these are employers that were surveyed. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but you know, when you think about what do I need? What are employers looking for, and how do I showcase that I have those skills? These are maybe some things that you might want to think about or focus on. And not saying that you need to have every one. We're not all strong in all of these areas, but pull out the ones as that you feel that you are very, very good at. And then that can kind of help you set the baseline for things you want to make sure that you're talking about, or things that you make sure you plug into your resume, or things you make sure you plug into your answer in an interview, making sure that you're pointing out some of these skills or attributes. And then I think what's important to make sure is everything is all about connecting and connecting the dots for the employer. That's your job. So then backing this up with some type of example. So if you feel as though you want to really focus and hit home with the employer that you're very good at problem solving, working in a team environment, and taking initiative, don't just say those. And that's sometimes what I hear a lot of students do when I'm going through them with them in a mock interview setting, is they tout those skills, but then how can I understand why you have those? It's your job to make me understand why you're good at those skills or attributes by connecting a real life example to me. And that could be an example if you're teaching, if you're a TA, it could be an example if you're a GA in a lab. It could be something in another job or work experience that you've had. It can be in any setting. It's not about where the example takes place. It's just that you have an example. So make sure that you're always having an example to any type of attribute that you say that you have. So again, kind of going to where when we think about getting ready in preparation for the interview, kind of the first steps, you're invited to a virtual interview for 30 minutes. What are some things that you want to make sure that you understand and that you're going into the interview? So just like we talk about how it's important to really cater your resume or CV and cover letter to a specific job, it's also the same strategy for an interview. So you are very much catering all of your answers and all of your preparation towards this specific organization. So things that you might want to make sure that you're aware of going into the interview, and I would start this, a week or two before, or as soon as you find out. Typically it's like a week or two notice that they're giving you when you're alerted that you have an interview, a first level interview. So then these are things you want to go right into looking up. This is all about research. And so making sure that you have an awareness of the company or organization, and they will ask you in some way. From our last virtual career fair, that's some feedback that we got from the employers, is that the students kind of knew of the organization and knew what the title was, but when they really asked them, when they probed them deeper about how much they knew, they really were not following through on what the employer thought that they should know about the company or organization. So making sure that you're really understanding different facets of the company or organization. So things you might want to research as you begin to prepare for your interview. Their mission statement, which is always going to be on their website. What are their goals? What are the goals of the organization? What do they really value? What is the company culture like? What types of initiatives or things do they have? I know one company has food truck Fridays. They have an indoor mini golf place. That's the culture. So it's definitely a team environment, collaborative. They want coworkers to connect. So that would be the culture. So that's something that you might want to share, is that you know about that, and maybe that's something that really interests you. Now, not every company and organization has that, but that's just an example. So those are definitely right from the get-go things that you want to be researching. Who are their clients? Who specifically do they work with? Do they work with doctors? Do they work with the community? Do they work with, maybe they don't work with humans. Maybe they do animal research. So it's pretty much animals are their clients. Is that what it is? So know whom the clients are and what are the types of services that this company or organization offers, because it's probably not just one service. It's probably layered and packaged into a whole portfolio of different services. So make sure that you have an idea of what other services a company might offer and to whom. Make sure you understand the competitive landscape. Is there a competing company or organization? That's going to definitely take more research than probably just their webpage. But, I have on the side here, LinkedIn, Glassdoor. These are all other really great methods to do your research to find information about the company. So who are their competitors? Even just thinking about Lysol wipes, it's not just Lysol wipes. There's competitors, there's the off-brand companies. What are some other competitors that they're always going to be up against? Make sure you know what that is, if it's applicable. And know of any leadership transitions, organizational structure. Sometimes on web pages, you can find the org chart, which I think is incredibly helpful to see. But you might not always have access to that. So I would say, if anything, that's probably the least important of the list I'm giving you. But it is always really good to know kind of what does the reporting structure and the organizational structure look like within the environment that you're going to be in. So 2 favorite ways, aside from just the web page, definitely LinkedIn and definitely Glassdoor. Why I like Glassdoor is that, and again, as anytime you get feedback, sometimes you might want to take it with a grain of salt, but on Glassdoor, you can actually find company feedback from employees and former employees about current employees and former employees about what they say about the organization. And sometimes that can be incredibly insightful. So that's why I like Glassdoor. You can also look up, which we'll get into later, but salary and number of people hired. Sometimes you can find a little intel on interviews and interview questions. So I just think it's a good tool to have in your toolbox. And then LinkedIn, it's always good to see, go to a specific company or organization and look at the list of people that work there that are on LinkedIn. And then you can see if there's any Miami alumni. That's always a great conversation starter. Interviewers love when interviewees have a little bit of personal information on them about maybe what their undergrad was or what their major was. And that just shows that you really were taking time to do research. So that's what LinkedIn is really good for. Again, still in the preparation mode, things that you want to make sure that you think about or that you're prepared or that you at least have an answer to, is the salary. Generally speaking, you're not going to have insight on the salary on a first level interview. You might be able to find the salary on Glassdoor. Some might list it in a job description, or you might have someone that works there that can tell you if you have an inside relationship. But generally on a first level interview, they're not going to discuss the salary. That's just standard practice. I don't know why, it's just kind of the way that it is. So you shouldn't expect to kind of hear from the employer about salary. The only thing they might ask you is, what are your salary requirements? And that could be by way of in the application or in that first level interview. And so that's why I'm saying you just want to be prepared to discuss it, but don't feel as though you're going to land on a specific salary number. So if they bring it up, and that is only if they bring it up, it should not be something that's brought up by you, be prepared. So I think some things that you could say is you're negotiable on that. I always think that that's a good standard answer, because you certainly don't want to highball them, and you certainly don't want to lowball them. You want to be paid what your experiences and skills are. But at the same time, you really should probably wait until they present you with an offer, and then that gives you the ability to negotiate. So that's why I like saying negotiable. If they ask you for a specific amount, then that's when I encourage students to say a range. I think a range is always good instead of one specific amount. And so the range, that's either going to be on the job description. Sometimes you can Google and do little internet searches to find out the ranges. I know especially with institutions, you can do that. Public institutions, you can do that. Companies, industry is a little bit difficult, but some other options for you to kind of do a little bit of research on the salary. Glassdoor, as I mentioned, is really good. And pay scale is kind of okay. So I would probably use Glassdoor for that. So those are just some options for you, but be prepared to discuss, but probably in most cases, not so much the first interview. You want to make sure that you're really understanding what that compensation package is. It probably will be listed in the job description, but that might be something you want to ask in the first interview, because maybe the compensation package could be dependent on if it's a job you even consider. So is it medical? Is it dental? What type of insurance is it? Do they have retirement? Do they contribute to your retirement? Is there moving costs that they would be willing to pay for if this is an out-of-state job? Are there other benefits? Is there a flexible spending account? What other options are there? Do they reimburse for tuition? Do they, I'm trying to think of what else? Eye exams. So you just kind of have to think through really truly understanding not only is the pay going to be important, but what is the total compensation package? So that's something you're going to want to ask at the end of the interview if you don't already have a good idea of what that is. So again, the job description should tell you a little bit. Pay scale, NerdWallet are also really good. The cost of living, there's a cost of living calculator on pay scale. And so that is if you're looking to move out of state, you're say from Ohio to New York City. We kind of already know that there's a huge cost of living difference between the state of Ohio and New York City. So this is just a calculator that'll allow you to put in your monthly expenses for Ohio and then to see the salary that you need in order to survive in New York City. So it's just a good little tool to have, and that could also kind of help you in your negotiation process with the salary as well. All right, so now that you've done all of your research, now it's time for the big day. So these are just kind of a couple different options of interviews that we're seeing. You know, certainly pre-COVID, in-person interviews were happening a lot more consistently. Those really are not so much anymore. So really the two that I want to focus on the most are going to be the phone interview, which could be the first level, and then the video or virtual interview, which is going to be either the first level or the second level. It just depends. In my office, we're hiring for staff right now for a few positions, and the first level interview is a phone. And then the second interview, if they make it on campus visit, is virtually. So it just kind of depends the setup of the organization. The difference is usually the first level interview is shorter, typically 30 to 45 minutes. The second interview is probably going to be much longer of a day, a couple hours, half a day, maybe even a full day, depending. And all of those now, for the most part, are being facilitated virtually. So then there is other options. You know, the in-person interview sometimes leads to a component of having to present information or to present a PowerPoint on something. Some might be including that in the video and virtual interview. I know my office does. So as a part of their second level interview, they have to present a topic that we tell them prior. So that might be something you might want to be prepared for. Group interviews, again, those are really not happening unless they're by way of all virtually. Some companies do that. Abercrombie and Fitch is famous for doing group interviews. And that's just to really get a sense of who's really standing out, who really knows the answers, who's comfortable, who is able to maintain and balance this stressful group interview environment. And so they're just really looking on nuances and seeing how you interact with the group and what your kind of MO is during the group interview. But again, we're not really seeing a ton of those. I would encourage you all to think about doing a mock interview through our office. I think it's probably one of the most important services that we offer because it allows students an opportunity to practice the actual day of interview. So it's modeled after a first level interview. So it's going to be what you could very much expect on your first interview. Baseline questions: why are you interested in this position? Tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those are generally the questions you're going to be asked in a first level interview. And so I think taking the opportunity to practice that, interviewing is definitely an art, and it is very strategic. And so you really need to understand some of the nuances of your answers and how they come across. So no better way to do that than to prepare, right? So, and to practice. So we are offering in-person mock interviews. You can sign up on Handshake should you want to do an in-person one, but we also have purchased a platform where you can do it virtually, which a lot of students are doing, and it's called Big Interview. You can access it through our website under resources and go ahead and sign up. And so it's going to take you through a live virtual interview. It'll record that, and then it will be emailed to one of our mock interviewers, and then they will review it and they will jot down feedback and send it back to you of things you need to think about, other things maybe you might want to include in the answers, and it's just a great opportunity. So I would encourage you all, if there's one takeaway from this, is that you need to do a mock interview. I will say prior to that, in order to sign up for any of our mock interview in person or big interview platform, we want to make sure that you're somewhat prepared. So going through a basic interviewing webinar, they're about 45 minutes to an hour. You can find the dates and times on our webpage. We offer a ton of different times and days. And again, it's probably going to give similar information to what I'm presenting to you today, but it's going to expand on it a little bit. So it's just going to help you be more prepared for when you actually go through your practice interview. And again, that's called basic interviewing. And it'll be notated on your Handshake account that you completed it, and then that will allow you to sign up for your mock interview or your virtual interview. So phone interviews, or I'm sorry, not phone interviews, virtual interviews. So, you know, more and more of these are happening due to COVID-19. So, and I feel that even once there is a vaccine and maybe once things start to turn back to normal or a new normal, I do still anticipate that there is still going to be a lot of virtual interviews because they're really successful and they're working. It saves money on travel. It's much easier and more efficient to navigate through the virtual world. And so I do anticipate that these are going to stick around. So it's really good for you to have a really good idea and a look into what that process is. So some of the things and a lot of the things that we worked with students prior to the career fair on is just like, what do I need to make sure that I'm aware of? Because there are some nuances and things that you might not think about as you're preparing for a virtual interview. So you 100 times over want to make sure that you're paying attention to your background. You don't want to have anything behind you that is inappropriate or could be viewed as unprofessional. So just one example, we're on a college campus. Some of you might be in residence halls. Most of you are probably in off-campus housing and apartments. You don't want to have anything that would, for example, maybe not having a beer banner behind you or a beer sign behind you or a light up PBR sign behind you. You want to make sure that your background is very professional. Plain is fine. If you have a little bit, you know, I've got little bookshelves behind me, little candles, wine glasses, you know, that's okay. That's just decor. So that's fine. There's a balance, I think, between decoration and then just a huge looming beer sign. So just be aware of that. Really pay attention to how it looks. Maybe Zoom a friend or do a Google Meet with a friend so that they can take a look at it as you're prepping and practicing to see what your background, how it appears to someone else. So just make sure decor is fine, appropriate decor is okay. A blank wall is really probably even better for an interview setting. If I was going to be going through a virtual interview, I would not do it here. I'm in my home. I would probably do it in my office or the library. So those are things that you might want to think about. We do also, you can reserve interview rooms within my office as well. If you're interested in doing that, that gives you a space, a private space, plain walls. You don't have to worry about your background. So know that that is an option should you be presented with the opportunity for a virtual interview. Lighting is incredibly important. I think I'm coming across to you all as pretty clear probably. So the best way to think about that is do not sit in front of a window. There are so many times that I have advising meetings with students via Zoom and they're sitting in front of their window, and the way that the light is coming in, it's like dark and it's shadow and I can't see really the person I'm talking to, and then it gives me a headache because I'm glaring and it's glaring in my face. That really matters. And I actually had a student this summer that I was working with that we were preparing him for an interview, a virtual interview, and he didn't get the position. And so I told him he needed to ask for feedback about why. And he indicated that the reason that he didn't get it, one of the biggest reasons was because of the lighting, and it was really hard to see him, and it didn't appear as though he had paid attention to that, and that wasn't a part of his preparation process, and that they couldn't hear him on the mic, and so he was going in and out. It was not clear, and so those were the reasons, one of the reasons that he didn't get hired. So that really, really matters. So don't sit in front of a window. Again, another good opportunity or a good reason for you to take advantage of is to do it in the Career Center or in the library. Make sure you're doing a mic and sound check. Again, even if you're just setting it up with a friend prior via Zoom, just making sure, do I sound okay? How do I sound? Can you hear me okay? Am I cutting in and out? Those are all things that really need to be taken into consideration now for a virtual interview. One of the best things that I encourage students to do as soon as they get on the Zoom call with the committee is to just say, you know, I just want to make sure before we get started, can everyone hear me okay? I did a sound check before, but I just want to make sure I'm still coming across clearly. I think that that's important. And then that gives the opportunity for them to say, okay, great, that's something that this person's paying attention to because it's key. And then actually, you know what, can you raise your volume a little bit? Or you're breaking up, can you check your internet? Do you have full bars? Or I don't know, something. But just asking the people that you're interviewing with, can everybody hear me okay? I think is incredibly important, and it's polite. You still want to be dressed in business professional from head to toe. Dressing the part, even in a virtual capacity, I think is still important. So don't just wear professional from waist up, do from toes to head. I would encourage you, because you never know like what happens if, like, for instance, you don't have the door shut because you forgot to shut it, and then you need to shut the door because your roommates came home or something, or someone's vacuuming, it's really loud, and you know, say, excuse me, let me shut the door, I'm sorry. And then you're like in your pajama bottoms. You just literally never know what could happen. So making sure, and that's a huge faux pas. So making sure that you are dressed from head to toe really is going to alleviate any of that and be no big deal should you need to stand up for a moment. Now, an employer is not going to ask you to stand up to say, make sure that you're dressed, but I'm just using that as an example of, you never know what can happen during an interview. Sometimes the weirdest things happen. And if it's something you need to stand up for, or, you know, maybe you need to grab your pen, or the pen you have ran out of ink and there's one across your desk, so you need to grab it. So, you know, and that might involve you standing up a little bit. So just try to forward think on that and make sure you're dressed head to toe. Having in front of you, just like you would in a face-to-face interview, having a notepad beside you to maybe jot down questions you want to ask or things you want to make sure that are covered. A notebook should you need to write down any pertinent information like email addresses for the follow-up. Having a pen or a couple pens, you know, and then some water. You're doing a lot of talking, and so you're going to get thirsty. So just something to take a sip of. Making sure that the link works. They're going to probably send you the link prior to the interview, maybe the morning of or the day before. Just click on it to make sure that it's actually going into something you should be able to tell. So just verify that it works prior to the interview. That can alleviate some stress and angst. And these strategies really, these interview strategies are still apply, not for virtual interviews, but for any type of interview that you may have. You know, for the addition of the lighting, you don't really need to worry about that when you're in person or when you're on the phone. You don't need to worry about the background, but still, you know, making sure that if you're on a phone interview, can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure I can hear you all okay. You know, because sometimes they have you on speaker because it's a committee, and so you're on speakerphone. So still making sure if it's via phone, everyone can still hear you. And then certainly the business professional is applicable to all. We even tell students for phone interviews to dress professionally. Always having notes, notebook, pen, and water next to you is important too. So, you know, when you're thinking about interviews, probably one of the most important pieces, or one of the best strategies that an employer will ask you to really try to understand how you can communicate your experiences, are by way of behavioral interview questions. Whoops. And so behavioral interview questions are one of the most popular type of questions. This is one that we do a lot of training in our office on for students. And no matter what type of area, industry, academia, doesn't matter where you're going, you can expect to have these questions asked to you. So there's just kind of the overarching idea of, you know, when someone asks you a behavioral question, and what I mean by that is when they say, tell me about a time when you had to confront your supervisor, or share with me an example, a time that you worked in a team. So they're asking you a specific question, which then allows you to provide a very specific example. So that is essentially what a behavioral interview question is. So the idea of that, and thinking about, aside from just presenting a very good example, You know, what is the goal? So you need to make sure that you have a clear understanding of exactly what you've done in the past. How can you showcase, by way of an example, in an interview about a specific thing that you've done? So a specific role, specific responsibilities. Those are going to help you come up with how you should shape different types of behavioral interview responses. How are you going to do that? It's just essentially communicating your experiences. So you're going to set the stage and you're going to give a short narrative. You know, when I was a graduate assistant working in a lab, I was the lab manager and blah, 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 blah. So giving a specific example and almost like a shortened story slash narrative is how you're going to want to communicate your experiences, but making sure, again, there's examples in there. And then I've already talked about this, the preparation part. The best thing you can do is the mock interview or the big interview. So the way that we think about this, the behavioral interview questions, because probably 70% of your interview is going to be made up of these behavioral interview questions. Actually, maybe even more. So we call it the CAR method to kind of help us make sense of it, to make sure we're including all important components. And this is a strategy. So context, action, result, that gives you CAR. So what is the context? You need to set the stage. You need to tell the story. Who, what, when, where, why, if all of those are applicable to your example. And then what did you do and how did you do it? Did you address your supervisor? Did you sit down with your supervisor? Did you have to work through HR to have a facilitated? Like, what did you do? How did you do it? And then we want to know the outcome or the results. What specifically happened? It ended up going really well. And then even though I had to confront my supervisor, we were able to come up with a contract and an agreement. And so since then, we've really been able to maintain that and blah, 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 whatever it is. So that's then shows me, okay, so like closing the loop. Think of it as like a big circle and you're closing the circle by answering each piece of the CAR method. So the next piece of this is the, so tell me about yourself. So that's generally going to be probably the introduction question. So we kind of think about it as like this whole Miami hello. You know, so what is your name? Where are you from? What program are you in? What's your discipline? What's your focus? What's your area? What year are you? When are you graduating? Those are the stats. So you want to start that out with the stats. And then you want to talk about what are you currently doing now? So you're a full-time graduate student in psychology, and you are currently working within the lab on this, and this. Like, what specifically are you doing now that's related to work? And then if you want to talk about maybe some of your other hobbies or interests, this would be a good time to kind of include some of that other personal information in there, so that the audience can really capture really a little bit about yourself. And then, you know, where are you going? What is your plan? Why are you applying for this position? Why are you interested in this position? I like the first one better than the second one. Why are we having a conversation today? I just focus on the where are you going. So what's your plan? You know, where do you see yourself? Why do you really want to work in this company or organization? That's when you can fold in information about the company culture that you might really like, or what you saw on their website that really interests you. Typically, this is going to be about 3 minutes. It is a little bit of a longer answer, so that is okay. The tell me about yourself question can kind of capture a lot of different pieces of you. So that's why I'm saying it's okay to include the personal component as well. You know, at the end of the day, you know you best. So I think it's important as you're preparing to really think about the other piece of the second most popular, which is what the rest of your interview will be made up of. You know, firstly, it's going to be the behavioral questions that we've already talked about, but it's also going to be then the open-ended questions. And when I think of open-ended questions, I think of a few that come to mind. You know, so identify your strengths, identify your weaknesses. If your coworker were sitting beside you today, what would they say your work ethic is? Those are like really popular ones. Why are you interested in this position? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those are all open-ended questions that you also need to be prepared for. What is it about this job that interests you? What is it about this job that gives you concern or you feel as though you might need additional training? Again, all questions that you should be able to answer because you did the preparation piece. So open-ended questions are going to be the rest of that interview, maybe the 30%, the 20 to 30% of the interview is going to be the open-ended ones. So in order to help you kind of prepare for the open-ended piece and really actually for the CAR method as well, you really need to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. So you need to think about what are strengths that you know that you have. Is it project management? Is it facilitation? Is it working under a tight deadline? Is it communication written? Is it communication verbally? What is it that you know you are really, really, really good at? And again, make sure you have examples tied to that. And then you need to know what your weaknesses are because everybody has them. And it's the biggest pet peeve of mine when I'm working with a student and I ask them, what are your weaknesses? And they say that they're a perfectionist. That is one of the most, that is not a great answer because it's kind of been there, done that. And it's really not reflective of you being able to acknowledge that you have weaknesses. So think about what your weaknesses are. Is it organization? Is it time management? What are those? The trick to that is then providing an example of what you're doing to overcome those weaknesses. What are you actively working on to overcome those weaknesses? But saying that you're a perfectionist, so you take time to get things done. Sometimes it's running to a tight deadline, but you always get it done. That just isn't going to work as an appropriate answer. So really think about what am I not good at? And then you need to ask others, ask your family, ask your parents, ask your roommates, ask your significant other, ask your partner, what do you think my strengths are in the work context? And what do you think my weaknesses are? And see what they say about you. Because I can promise you in some capacity, they're going to ask you, how would others describe you? So you want to make sure that you know how others actually describe you. And hopefully it's aligned with how you describe yourself. But it might not be, it could be different. So, you know, we say like the 20-word bank is just kind of have these things tucked away in your head about the strengths and weaknesses. So I do think it's a good practice to get into. If you're not sure what your strengths or weaknesses are, it's a good time to start really taking time to think about that. And then if you don't know how others view you, ask your supervisor, you know, ask your friends, ask your coworkers, how would you describe me professionally? Because now is a really good time to do that as you kind of enter into job search, interview search, interviewing preparation. All right, so things you really want to make sure on top of everything else that you've prepared for by way of answering questions and making sure your background is okay if it's a virtual interview. You need to really just kind of think through about some of the logistics of it. So making sure you know you've checked and you've double checked when does your interview actually start. So if it's by way of virtual or a phone interview, if it starts at 9 or 9:15, let's say it starts at 9:15, you want to make sure that you are calling in or logging in via Zoom or whatever method they have at like probably 9:10. 5 minutes before in the virtual or phone setting is completely acceptable. If this is a face-to-face interview and it starts at 9:15, I would recommend that you're at the door getting ready to like walk through the door to the office that you're starting your interview at 9 a.m. 15 minutes is usually what we say. 10 minutes is okay too, but we really like the 15. So make sure that you're allotting your time to travel, to park, to walk there so that you've got plenty of time to meet that 15-minute mark. During the actual interview, it can be very nerve-wracking. You can have maybe butterflies or a pain in your stomach, your hands are sweaty. That's completely natural and okay. You want to really make sure that you're taking the time to listen to what they are asking you. It is okay if you're writing it down on a piece of paper. What I've done in the past is I've written down keywords as they're asking me the questions. I've written down keywords so I can specifically remember what they're asking me and make sure that I answer that. Because it's okay, you know, you're going to be nervous during the interview. So listen carefully to what they're asking you. Take a moment and then respond. That's really the next one should be silence is not always a bad thing. So as they're asking you the question and you're writing it down simultaneously to the keywords to make sure you remember and you answer it correctly, taking a moment to form your thoughts and pausing is actually okay. Don't feel as though it's like you win an award if you answer the question immediately. That comes across as hasty, unprofessional. You're not really thinking through. In those cases, then someone will have that sometimes, you might have to say, can you repeat the question? Or does that make sense? You don't want to do that. You want to be calm is gonna be what gets you through it. So don't be afraid to take that silence or that pause prior to answering that question. Be aware, especially in a virtual or an in-person setting, be aware of that nonverbal communication. Making sure that you're not chewing gum, making sure that you are not, sometimes when we get nervous, we might cross our arms or shake back and forth. You just want to make sure that you're aware of that and just, again, really trying to stay calm, keeping your hands at your desk, on your desk or on your lap is completely acceptable. You always want to make sure, no matter what, that you're being honest and authentic about your experiences. You never want to lie. You never want to spin the story or the example so that it sounds like you did more than you really did. You really, truly want to be honest and authentic and represent your best self. And then being positive about your past experiences. You never want to talk ill or bad about someone that you worked with or an experience in an office that you had. It's this really small world and it really can appear as though you're angry and bitter. So, shaping it in a way to where you're still being authentic, that it wasn't the best, the environment was not something that I was able to really enjoy. The culture was not what I would prefer. And this is why I'm so interested in this organization, because it sounds as though the company culture really thrives on teamwork and collaboration and relationship building. And that really is what I'm looking for. And I haven't had that in my current role. That's maybe something that you can say. You're still honest, but you're not bashing your past experiences, because nobody wants to hear someone talk bad about someone else in an interview setting. So definitely making sure that you're being professional, even when you're talking about a not so positive experience. And then the follow-up, this is the part that you really want to make sure, again, thinking about a circle, that you're closing the circle up on this. And that's going to be the follow-up. Make sure that if you're in person, you're getting the business cards of the people that interview you. And that's as simple as just asking, may I please have your business card? If it's by way of a phone interview or a virtual email or a virtual interview, making sure that you have their email addresses. You probably will, because they probably will have been communicating with you and they might have already provided you with that information. You can always get their email addresses off of the webpage too, but make sure that you have something so that you can communicate with them afterwards. And a thank you email is completely appropriate. A time long ago, it wasn't. But now this is really actually what we hear employers prefer is via email. You want to take a moment and assess the opportunity and talk about in the email and your follow-up why it was, such a great, why this could be such a great opportunity for you. And then to yourself, you want to really evaluate your performance and write down, gosh, I really flubbed this question. In my next interview, I want to make sure that I hit this, this, and this. Take notes. That's going to help you evaluate your performance, be honest with yourself, and it will help showcase things that you really need to work on for your next interview. Here's just an example of a thank you email. You don't have to put the date on the email. It's already timestamped. Some people still do that, and that's okay. Dear interviewer, so if you have a specific name or if it's a committee, if you want to send them individually or as a group, personal preference, I would say individually, but there really is no standard. That's kind of just what you want to do. You want to thank them so much for their time and for the opportunity. You want to talk about something specific, a very specific part of the conversation that you had with the person or with the group, and talk about why you found that interesting and why that was meaningful to you. That really showcases that you soaked in information, that you were listening, that you were taking notes, that you remembered something. So that's always something good to kind of elaborate on, that you enjoyed the conversation and you love talking about the following things. again, this is a kind of a final shot at letting them know how badly you want the position. So you're really reiterating why you're so interested in the position and the organization, and why specifically. Is it because of the culture? Is it because of the mission? Is it because of the values? What is it specific? And give an example. And then remind them that you are a good fit for the job, and you know that they're looking for someone to really come in and be able to work in a gray area. That might happen, that it's, you know, up to interpretation, that they need someone who's able to really forge forward without a ton of supervision. Maybe that's one thing. So you can say, again, why this position is a great opportunity, and you will be able to do it well because you know they're looking for this and you are able to do that. And then just your first and last name. So typically it's like 2 paragraphs usually is what it is. Maybe 3 paragraphs, but you don't want it to be too long either, because think this is an email. So we all hate reading super long emails. So try to keep that in mind. So that's it. That's all the information that I have. I hope that this was helpful for you all, and that you were able to take away at least a few things perhaps as you begin kind of this next stage. So I'm definitely happy to answer any specific questions that anyone might have. Or I know this is recorded, so, you know, feel free to go back and jot down, or sometimes grad students take pictures of my presentations, but just something to help you as you begin this preparation period. So I'll hang around for a few minutes. If you want to chat something in the chat box, feel free.